want to get right to the core. So you want to know what it's all for. So you want to come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip to Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George. He knows what he's fighting for. It's Podcast by George. Podcast by George. Want to know what we're fighting for?
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on back in to another Podcast by George. Well, we've been gone for a while. It's been a week since I've done a Podcast by George, and I usually do 2 or 3 a week. And I was setting up to do one with Stephen W. Schmidt, the Lucan Endowed Professor of Political Science from Iowa State University. We were going to talk about Joe Biden's upcoming vice presidential pick, which has since occurred. We'll talk about that shortly. And I also had lined up Dr. Andrew Nish to talk about the latest information on COVID-19, and also on the topic of the coronavirus. Chris McNeil, the outstanding roving journalist for The Guardian, the U.S. correspondent for The Guardian newspaper, was going to come on the podcast to talk about what he's seeing in the Midwest. He's traveling around Missouri and Iowa again, and he's talking about a looming issue based on what he's seeing with a COVID increase and outbreak, as he's looking at what we're all looking at. No social distancing, no mask wearing, people not doing what they should be doing, particularly down in Missouri, where the governor seems to be intent on spreading coronavirus, but also here in the state of Iowa. So Chris McNeil was on standby. Well, as I was getting ready to set up and do the interview with Schmidt, Dr. Schmidt, boom, out go the lights. Electricity goes off, and this hellacious storm comes through, this Derecho thing. And a couple of things about that. Now, I'm getting to be an old boy. You hear me talk about that on the podcast a lot. I'd never heard of a Derecho. I mean, I had no idea what this is, and I very seldom have ever seen a storm like that. I saw 2 wind gusts of hurricane velocity, maybe F1 tornado velocities that I've never seen before. And of course, it took down the trees and the power lines and caused all this problem here in the Midwest. A Derecho. And the point that I want to make about that is that it's just another climate crisis occurrence. And you can't put these things in context of the climate crisis enough. I try to talk about it a lot on the podcast. I don't even talk about it enough. I want to read to you what Lee Camp says in his outstanding new book that I'm promoting as much as I can on Podcast by George. And it's right here. Hold on. The book is entitled Bullet Points and Punchlines by Lee Camp. Get it. This thing is great. But here's what he says. Now, he talks about everything in this book, but this is the section on climate change. Climate change is the only thing we should be thinking about. He says, you see, the planet we call home has existed for roughly 4.55 billion years, but numbers that large mean almost nothing to me or to most people, so I choose to break it down. If we lay the age of the Earth over our calendar year, that would amount to 518,264 years per hour, or 144 years per second. So if we have 10 or 11 years until the point of no return, as climate scientists have repeatedly told us, that means we have less than a desisecond left before midnight in which to change our society completely to avoid running the Earth into a piping hot fajita. Oh, that's Lee Camp, and he goes on. But the point that he's making is we should all be thinking and talking about climate change all the time. And this is a perfect example. This Derecho thing that struck the Midwest, particularly here in Iowa, needs to be put into the context of climate crisis. And I want to tell you something that struck me about this the most. When you see even the Weather Channel guys, right down to your local meteorologist on your local television station. No one talks about how these weather occurrences are climate related. And it's extremely important because your local news people, they have some sway. I mean, people watch them. It's, a lot of times no big deal. But these weather guys are really popular across the United States. These local guys, and here in Des Moines, where I'm based, as an example, really popular. They appear at the state fair. I mean, hundreds of people go to see these guys, stand behind them waving signs and carrying on. You've seen them on the Today Show, those types of things. Well, if those guys were to start putting these local weather occurrences into the context of worldwide climate change, it would have a huge impact on how people think and how they respond and react to the climate crisis that we're all experiencing. So, I want to single them out. I call on these guys. If they have a conscience, they need to start doing that. It would be tough. Some of them would probably get fired. But if we're going to turn into a steaming hot fajita, as Lee Camp says, what difference does it make? Stand up. Take a stand. Be somebody. Stand for something, or you'll fall for anything. I think John Mellencamp had that in his song. And as long as I'm talking about local television news, in response to this Derecho, okay, so here again in the Des Moines area, several 100,000 people in the capital city of Iowa were without power. And the next day, people with generators, people with battery-operated radios with TV channels on them, they're tuning into their local television station, as was I, to see what the coverage was, to see what the news was, to see when the hell the power was coming back on. And they pretty much missed it, folks. I mean, it's shocking. And particularly for the early morning television news. Now, here locally, I don't know why exactly, maybe because it's, low price, low cost to put it on. They start having local newscasts at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. That's earlier than when I was doing it on radio back in the day. Well, they don't have much of an audience, but this is one chance when every eyeball, every ear is tuned to the television, if they can get the thing to come on because of the power outage, to get the news. And they maybe had a couple of minutes of coverage. Honest to God, it was pitiful. It was horrible. It reminds me again of, I was so frustrated when I was in the business. And one of the reasons I got out, I just could not believe it. My God, you guys are sitting down there day after day with nobody watching or caring at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning doing newscasts. And here it is. People are getting up to watch you. Why? Because they went to bed at 8 o'clock at night. It was dark. They didn't have any electricity. Everybody's up at 5 o'clock in the morning to watch the local television news, and literally they're standing there, these local TV anchors, and it's a man and a woman on the station that I was watching. The woman is standing there and doing one of these poses. I'm looking at, what the hell is it? I mean, we're in a crisis here, the likes of which your audience has not seen maybe since those huge floods that sent Des Moines back to the Stone Age in 1993, or maybe the historic flooding in eastern Iowa in 2008, or the historic flooding in western Iowa. I mean, again, these occurrences happen all the time. It's all a part of climate crisis. And you're standing there posing, and their lead story, the one that they had a reporter out live down at the Y at 5 o'clock in the morning telling people to come down to the local YMCA if they were bored or wanted to recharge their cell phone. 10 million acres of dollars worth of cropland lay wasted across the state. People are without power. Where I'm at, they were without power, they were without water, and they were without sewer because it's all dependent upon electricity. And they're standing there posing and talking about coming down to the Y to charge your cell phone. I'm not kidding you. It's probably still on the internet. If you Google it, you can find it. Now, this is a rant today, so I'm going to carry on a little bit. And I hate to single people out when they're trying to make their way in the media world. I was trying to do it at one time. You have two categories of people, really. You have people that are, up and goners, basically. They're just trying to hit the station and get up to the next rung on the corporate ladder. And then you have careerists. And I don't know which is worse, to tell you the truth. Maybe the careerists, because they don't want to rock the boat. A good example would be these weather guys. Some of them have been there for 20 or 30 years. They're not going to link this weather stuff on air to climate crisis because it would endanger their career, their livelihood. Half of the audience would hate it because they're deniers or they're Republicans or they just don't want to see it. And so you don't get the straight skinny when it comes to this stuff, but it would have huge impact on our understanding of the weather that's affecting us, including a derecho. I mean, never heard of a derecho. Anyway, so that's what happened. And as far as me personally concerned is, I couldn't do the podcast, but it wasn't that tough. Honest to God, I got a generator, so I was able to power the things that we needed. We didn't have air conditioning. It was kind of hot, I got to admit. I was able to power my water, which is dependent upon electricity. And even the sewage system is a pump to a municipality out where I live. And that was a problem. But it was all dealt with. And, I'm from a farm, so these kind of things don't bother me as much as some people. And there was a lot of news coverage on all of this. You might have seen it. A lot of people that have lived in town and had all of these amenities their entire life were extremely upset. And I will say this, when you watch the news coverage like I did, and you know exactly what the circumstance is because it's affecting you, and you see the way that it's being reported, you see the differences, the things that aren't exactly true. You understand the situation with news coverage a lot more on a very specific local level like that. Well, okay, take that and consider that the same thing is true when it comes to the nation and when it comes to the world. And that brings me up to the next big news item that I wanted to talk about, which is the selection by Joe Biden as his vice presidential running mate, Kamala Harris. And of course, that's like sticking a sharp stick in the eye of all of the people on the left side of the political spectrum. And you'd look at it and say, well, why the hell would he do that? Why would you pick Kamala Harris as your running mate? You've got the entire left out there, and I'm talking mostly like the Bernie people that are kind of tapping their toe and waiting to see what's going to happen next. And you pick one of the biggest right-winger type neoliberal candidates from the field, the person everybody calls a cop, the person that I call a narc because of her prosecution of people on marijuana offenses back in the state of California, where she was the attorney general before she became a U.S. senator. This is somebody that nobody really likes. Kamala Harris got nowhere in the presidential primaries, dropped out early when Tulsi Gabbard took her down. And I'm going to play that little tidbit here for you to take a look at that again as a remembrance of what I'm talking about here. And had no delegates, and that's the person that Joe Biden picks. Well, why? Well, here's undoubtedly the truth. Because of Trump and his weakness within his own party, people in the Republican Party that are thinking, God, just give me somebody to vote for. Joe Biden pairs himself with, again, a moderate neoliberal, somebody that's going to vote for the war machine, somebody that's going to be kicking and dragging when it comes going against corporate interests on climate change, somebody that's really tough, a big law and order candidate like Biden himself is, to appeal to those Trump voters that are disaffected that they think will come over and vote Democrat. To me, I think that's flawed logic. I don't think those people will vote at all. But if they do vote, they'll vote for Trump. I don't think they're going to vote for Joe Biden under any circumstances. But that's the that's the DNC belief. They thought it was going to happen with Hillary Clinton. Again, that they would poll Republican vote to Hillary because of Trump. It didn't happen in 2016. We'll see if it's going to happen in 2020. But what we do know is that the largest voting bloc is comprised of people that don't vote at all. They're non-voters. They're people that sit there and don't like anything that's going on. And a lot of these people, again, are the populist part of America. They're the progressive part of America. But the Democrats don't want to go to those people. They don't want to provide candidates that serve their interests, which are primarily Climate change, again, got to talk about that all the time. Medicare for all, as an example, and an end to these senseless, costly, killer regime change wars around the planet, because that goes against the corporate interests of both parties, Democrat and Republican. So we get these candidates. The Overton window continues to move to the right, folks, to these neoliberal candidates in the midst of the Democratic Party. And everybody on the left that was sitting there and thinking, well, maybe he'll pick a progressive person or somebody that has a progressive point of view on something. Well, it ain't happening, folks. So what else do I think about Kamala Harris? Here's a very poignant video clip, and maybe you saw this in the presidential debates. This really is very illustrative of what Kamala Harris is all about and what the people in California think about her. I don't even know if she could carry California, to tell you the truth. But here's Tulsi Gabbard, and you also understand why Tulsi was basically prevented, even though she qualified, from appearing in any future debates, and why she's so disliked by the DNC. But God, I love this moment. Check it out.
Congresswoman Gabbard, you took issue with Senator Harris confronting Vice President Biden at the last debate. You called it a, quote, false accusation that Joe Biden is a racist. What's your response?
I want to bring the conversation back to the broken criminal justice system that is disproportionately negatively impacting black and brown people all across this country today. Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Harris, your response.
As the elected Attorney General of California, I did the work of significantly reforming the criminal justice system of a state of 40 million people, which became a national model for the work that needs to be done. And I am proud of that work. And I am proud of making a decision to not just give fancy speeches or be in a legislative body and give speeches on the floor, but actually doing the work of being in the position to use the power that I had to reform a system that is badly in need of reform. That is why we created initiatives that were about reentering former offenders and getting them counseling. It is why, and because I know that criminal justice system is so broken, that I am an advocate for what we need to do to not only decriminalize, but legalize marijuana in the United States.
I want to bring Congresswoman Gabbard back in. Your response,
The bottom line is, Senator Harris, when you are in a position to make a difference and an impact in these people's lives, you did not. And worse yet, in the case of those who were on death row, innocent people, you actually blocked evidence from being revealed that would have freed them until you were forced to do so. There is no excuse for that. And the people who suffered under your reign as prosecutor, you owe them an apology.
Tulsi Gabbard and that infamous takedown of Kamala Harris at the presidential debates here this past spring. Now, and Kamala Harris, how did she respond? Well, she attacked Tulsi Gabbard afterwards with, and they're all attacks basically, but with an untruth, linking her to Assad again and the situation in Syria and those gas attacks, which by the way have been debunked. Check out stories on that if you haven't seen it all already. But good on you, Tulsi. I mean, she was trying to shine a light on it as best she could. And then immediately after what you just saw, Hillary Clinton, whose surrogate, really her sock puppet, a lot of people say, is Kamala Harris. That was the candidate that she wanted to come through these presidential debates. Well, Hillary went on the offensive and tried to link Tulsi to being an agent of Russia. A useful idiot, basically, and Tulsi sued her. Well, that's all in the past, and I wanted to deal more with the present time and the future time in this podcast by George. Just the rant for today. That pretty much wraps up what I wanted to talk about, just to get back together here and do a few minutes to let you know that I'm still at the Controls Podcast by George is still going strong. I'm going to have those guests that I mentioned. We're going to reschedule the good doctor to talk about the selection of Kamala Harris and his understanding of politics, and we'll see how he agrees or disagrees with me. Andrew Nish, the good doctor, will be making a house call to talk about our fumbling of the ball here when it comes to the coronavirus. And again, the need for everyone to mask up, for God's sake, stay home if at all possible, because the worst is coming. I'm telling people that if we do in the fall and the wintertime what we're doing now, which is not much, is if we do this, they're going to be stacking bodies up like cordwood and digging mass graves by Christmas time. That's how bad I think it's going to get based on what I'm seeing. And we're going to talk to Dr. Andrew Nish about what you can do for your own peace of mind, if nothing else, during these calamitous coronavirus years. Well, not years, let's hope months. And then lastly, Chris McNeil. That's going to be great because he's impartial. He's from The Guardian. He's out of the UK. And, you know, if you want to know what you really look like, if you want to understand what your real behavior is like, get somebody else. Get somebody that hardly knows you to give you an impartial third-party opinion. And that's what Chris will do, because he doesn't have any vested interests here. He's out of the UK. I'm very interested to see how he's looking at Missouri and the state of Iowa in particular. And that's all coming up, and that'll be very soon. But I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you like the rants. I don't do them a lot. Just get on once in a while and try these out, and we'll be back with you again very soon. But that's going to do it for right now. That's going to wrap it up. That's another podcast by George.